So I want to talk a little bit about a focal point for this next paper. On our last paper, we spent a lot of time talking about focus and thesis statements. This paper, we're going to focus on the next step in our domain, which is content. So a couple things about this paper that are a little different from the last one. We're still looking at a 4 to 5 page expository essay on a theme of your choice from Things Fall Apart. So again, remember that these papers are a little bit more free in terms of what you want to talk about than maybe some of the other ones that you've written. So I'd encourage you, if you're struggling to think up a topic, to dig back through the PowerPoints, to go back over some of the previous modules to try to develop a topic that you think would be an interesting thing to explore. And so, again, the goal is to thoroughly examine one idea. It's important to narrow your focus so that you can get a thoughtful 4 to 5 page paper. Unlike the last paper, I'm going to ask that you use at least 2 secondary sources for this one. So it was just 1 last time, and I'm looking for 2 this time. And also, unlike the last paper, I'm going to ask that you quote twice from Things Fall Apart rather than once, and that you quote at least once from each of your 2 sources. So if it's a 5-paragraph essay, 3 body paragraphs, you should have a total of 6 quotes from Things Fall Apart and at least 2 quotes from secondary sources. These things are minimums. They're not, and I there's a part of me that doesn't really love having to put in a formula like this. The general rule of thumb is you should be quoting frequently. There should be regular use of the text in the paper. And the reason that I'm asking for this higher level of quoting is the help benefit you, to give you some more content to work with, because content is really the thing I want to focus on in this paper. All right, so you can review this slide again. We're looking for scholarly, peer-reviewed articles using the databases in the library, and asking the librarians for help on those things would be useful ways to spend your time. This is the rubric domain for content. So we're looking for thesis-driven, specific details, fully explained details, good use of secondary and primary sources, analysis, and then this big idea here of higher-level critical thinking. So I just want to walk through a couple ideas, a couple tips for how to improve your content. It's really, I think, a worthwhile thing in each of your paragraphs to consider a more effective topic sentence. So for a lot of us in the last paper, the topic sentence ends up being something that feels plot-based, and we'll look at an example of that in a second. Instead, you should think of your topic as kind of like a mini thesis. What's the point that this paragraph will set out to prove? You could think of your 3 body paragraphs as like individual episodes in a 3-part series. So it should have kind of like a shapeliness of its own. Each paragraph should kind of have a specific point, a specific focus that it's trying to prove. But of course, it needs to lock in to the larger series and the larger idea of what the paper is about. I want to encourage a better balance between, I use the word contextualization instead of plot summary. So plot summary is definitely the bane for a lot of us in content on the last paper. Contextualization, though, is essential. We need a couple ideas of what's happening in the story, get a sense of where we are in the story before we can analyze it. But that always needs to serve the use of your analysis. So when it's plot summary, it's here are details. Either there's no analysis at all, it's just a retelling of the story, or it's like an examination of plot that doesn't actually gel with your analysis. So context is setting up a foundation of what's happening in the story in order to create some analysis, in order to put forward some insights. So some other really important things to consider in your paragraph are quotes that support your argument and elevate your insight. For some of us in the Macbeth paper, and again, we'll look at an example in a second, our quotes were just quotes of plot summary. It was just, here's an event that took place in the story, instead of here's an interesting quote that has an important idea that I can now spend some time analyzing. So you want to try to find quotes that are supporting your argument, that quotes are acting as evidence for your thesis, quotes are acting as also fodder for your insight. So try to find some key ideas in quotes in the book that give you things to talk about. Again, if you're struggling with that, I would encourage you to revisit the PowerPoints and the modules. The page numbers often are in there as well. So take advantage of the resources that are available to you. One of the things we're really trying to do in these kind of pre-college level papers is work on the quality of our insight. And so we want to try to avoid one-dimensional points. And a good example of that would be a plot point. A good topic sentence would not be Macbeth needs to kill Duncan to become king. Instead, we want to try to find something that deals with an actual idea that we can argue or analyze. Just a couple more tips. Of course, the text is just like, that's the best way to bring in some more insight is to quote from the text and to quote wisely from important places in the text. Using, again, your sources to support your thesis is important. Try to bring in insights that you don't have. Use your secondary sources and to share ideas that you think are helpful that are not your own ideas. Don't have a secondary source that just repeats something you've already said. Use a secondary source that's going to show something cool or something new in your paper. So I just want to look at 2 sample paragraphs. I wrote both of these, so they're not pulled from student writing. I don't want to, I'm sorry to just be reading these to you, but I want to read them and kind of talk through a couple things. And if this is helpful to you, it'll give you a sense of at least what I'm looking for. So this is a kind of a middling example. So it's from Macbeth. We can imagine this as a first body paragraph. At the start of the play, Macbeth, on his way home from battle, is stopped by the Weird Sisters. These beings proceed to tell Macbeth 3 prophecies. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter. Macbeth is clearly shaken by these prophecies and struggles to make sense of his future. Soon he begins to consider the possibility of murdering Duncan, and after talking to his wife, his ambition is further fueled to carry out the assassination. Macbeth at this point shows the unraveling of his mental state because he is willing to kill the king, an act almost universally regarded as immoral. All right, couple problems with this paragraph. And again, I got a lot of paragraphs like these, right? Especially for a verse body paragraph, because it kind of sets up what's coming later. But hopefully you can recognize how beholden to the plot this paragraph is. So the first sentence here, the topic sentence, is just a plot point. The quote that's used here, there's nothing to discuss, right? It's just a plot point. I don't need to quote to get this information. And really, what's the relevant information here? Just that Macbeth's going to be king. Who cares about Cawdor and clams, right? So here's 3.5 lines of text that could literally just be Macbeth is told he will be king, right? So here's some unnecessary plot. He's clearly shaken by these prophecies and struggles to make sense of his future. This could be something that moves into analysis, but it really just feels like a tag to what has been plot points so far. Again, a little bit later on, we get his ambition, and we also get unraveling of his mental state. These are buzzwords. They're probably buzzwords that are coming from my thesis, but there's no sustained analysis here. There's no opening up of what this idea means. There's no description to further define this ambiguous word of what ambition looks like. There's no further exploration of his relationship with his wife, what his mental state is actually, what's actually happening in his mental state. And really, it ends up just being kind of a simple statement that his willingness to kill somebody suggests that he's immoral. Of course it does, right? It's not really an interesting point to make, okay? So watch this second paragraph instead. And this is a longer paragraph, I know. Also, I should say, the page numbers are, the acts and scenes are right, but the line numbers are guesses. And there's a source in here that I made up, and I also made up the quote. So please do not quote Timothy Ironshanks McGregor in one of your papers. In the beginning of the play, Macbeth's properly attuned conscience compels him to hesitate when he considers killing Duncan. We got our contextualization, right? We're going to be talking about him killing Duncan, but here's my argument, my mini thesis for this paragraph, that his conscience is properly attuned, and that's what's causing him to hesitate, right? After Macbeth is told the prophecies, he almost immediately begins to, quote, yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature. That he would so quickly consider the murder of Duncan suggests the strength of his ambition, an ambition that is almost immediately inflamed by the sister's prophecy. In this consideration, though, Macbeth's conscience is still functioning, and he counters his own murderous thoughts with the hope that, quote, chance may crown me without my stir. Macbeth's hope that he will be able to remain passive in his achievement of the throne is further complicated by his view of Duncan. He worries that Duncan's, quote, virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. It is not until Lady Macbeth rankles his view of his own masculinity that Macbeth fully commits to murdering Duncan. Timothy Iron Shakes McGregor, made-up person, Mr. Dunn made him up, is helpful in explaining Macbeth's moral conflict here. Quote, again a made-up quote in a made-up book by a made-up person, Macbeth's irrational mind is pricked by his wife's emasculation. Emasculation, yeah. And the swollen product of that wound is a man willing to violate his own morals in order to prove himself valiant. While Macbeth is clearly culpable, the fact that Lady Macbeth has to convince and manipulate him into the murder shows that Macbeth is forced to violate a conscience that, at least at this point in the play, is in good working order. Okay, a couple things you'll notice. There's lots of text in here, right? I quote from the play twice, and then I've also included a quote from, admittedly, a made-up source that still seeks to support the idea that I'm making. The ideas here are that he hesitates, which proves the morality of his conscience. And that's my first goal, because my paper ultimately, in this paper I haven't written, but my paper ultimately is going to show this movement from a conscience that works to a conscience that he ignores to a conscience that doesn't work by the end of the story. All right. You'll notice that by pulling in actually 3 quotes from the play, I'm able to give myself some more stuff to talk about. And I'm able to cover more ground than just a simple plot summary of what's happening in an early scene in the book. Instead, I'm able to open up Macbeth's ideas here, an idea that's steeped in murder, which suggests his ambition, but also steeped in his conscience, which shows his view of Duncan, and also his hope that he won't have to do anything, and that stems from a conscience that's in good working order. All right. So at least in this paragraph, I hope you can see that it's a little bit more meaty. There's more insights in here. There's more ideas to discuss. There's more things to open up. And that's what I'm looking for in this next paper. I want to see a movement away from plot summary into some insights supported with good text quotation.